Have you ever wondered what happens when a single soldier's unconventional thinking changes the entire course of a war? What if I told you that one Native American warrior, armed with nothing but his ancestral knowledge and military training, managed to outsmart an entire German battalion during World War II? Before we dive into this incredible untold story of bravery and tactical genius, take a moment to comment where you're from and subscribe to our channel. We need your support to continue bringing these hidden chapters of American history to light. The date was October 12th, 1944. The Allied forces were pushing through the European theater, fighting desperately to break through the German defensive lines in northeastern France. The 101st Airborne Division found themselves pinned down near the forests of Ardennes, with limited supplies and dwindling ammunition. What happened next would become one of the most remarkable yet largely forgotten tactical victories in American military history. Among the ranks of the American soldiers was Private First Class Thomas Whitecloud, a 26-year-old Cherokee from Oklahoma, who had enlisted after Pearl Harbor. Before the war, Whitecloud had been studying engineering at the University of Oklahoma. But like many young men of his generation, he felt the call to serve his country. What his commanding officers didn't realize was that Whitecloud carried with him not just formal military training, but generations of Cherokee tactical knowledge passed down through his family. "My grandfather fought against Custer," Whitecloud once wrote in a letter home. "He taught my father, who taught me, that sometimes the greatest weapon isn't the one you hold in your hands, but the one you hold in your mind." As the situation grew increasingly desperate for the 101st, Major Robert Hammond called an emergency strategy meeting with his officers. The German 107th Panzer Division had them surrounded, with an estimated 3,000 troops and dozens of tanks. The Americans were outnumbered nearly 5-1. "We need ideas, gentlemen. Anything at all," Hammond reportedly said, his voice strained from days without proper sleep. The room fell silent. The officers had exhausted all conventional tactics. They were low on ammunition, medical supplies, and their radio communications had been spotty at best. Air support was impossible due to the heavy cloud cover that had persisted for days. It was then that an aide interrupted the meeting. "Sir, there's a private who says he has a strategy. He's quite insistent." Major Hammond, desperate for any solution, agreed to hear the man out. Private Whitecloud entered the command tent, standing tall despite his exhaustion. The officers exchanged skeptical glances. Who was this private to offer strategic advice to seasoned military commanders? "With all due respect, sir," Whitecloud began, "I believe I have a way to defeat the German forces, with minimal casualties on our side." As Whitecloud outlined his plan, the skepticism in the room grew palpable. Several officers openly scoffed. One reportedly muttered, "This isn't some tribal skirmish." Another called it a ridiculous fantasy. Major Hammond himself seemed doubtful, but was desperate enough to listen. The plan Whitecloud proposed was unlike anything taught at West Point or any other military academy. It drew on ancient Cherokee hunting and warfare tactics adapted for modern combat. It involved creating an elaborate illusion of strength where there was weakness, and weakness where there was strength. It required perfect timing, precise execution, and above all, a complete abandonment of conventional military doctrine. "You want us to deliberately expose our flanks?" Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson asked incredulously. "That's suicide!" "Not if they believe exactly what we want them to believe," Whitecloud countered. He then proceeded to explain how Cherokee hunters would often misdirect larger predators to trap them, using the animal's own strength and aggression against it. The room erupted in arguments. Most officers were vehemently opposed to entrusting the lives of hundreds of men to an untested strategy proposed by a private. But Major Hammond, perhaps seeing something in Whitecloud's confident demeanor, or perhaps simply out of options, made a fateful decision. "Quiet!" he shouted, silencing the room. We've tried everything else. We'll give Private White Cloud's plan a chance. The next 12 hours were spent meticulously preparing for what would later be called Operation Ghost Arrow. Soldiers were briefed on their highly unusual roles. Many were confused, some were skeptical, but all followed orders. They had no choice. Dawn broke on October 13th with an eerie silence. The fog that had covered the region for days still lingered, creating a ghostly backdrop for what was about to unfold. The German commanders, confident in their superior numbers and position, prepared for what they assumed would be a final push to crush the American forces. What they couldn't know was that during the night, under White Cloud's guidance, the American troops had fundamentally transformed their defensive position. Using techniques that echoed ancient Cherokee methods of confusing enemies and game alike, they had created an elaborate deception. "We need to think like water flowing around stone," White Cloud had explained to the soldiers. "We don't resist the enemy's strength. We redirect it." Small teams of 3 to 5 men were positioned to create the illusion of much larger forces. Sound deception techniques were employed, with carefully placed equipment rigged to simulate the noise of tanks and heavy artillery. Meanwhile, the actual heavy weapons were moved to completely unexpected positions. The German attack began at precisely 0700 hours. Their tanks advanced confidently toward what their reconnaissance had identified as the weakest point in the American line. But this was exactly what White Cloud had anticipated. This weak point was an elaborate trap. "They're taking the bait," radioed Sergeant Frank Miller from his observation post. As the first German tanks entered what they believed to be a vulnerable sector, they found themselves caught in a carefully orchestrated crossfire. Not from the front, where they expected resistance, but from positions that, according to conventional military doctrine, should have been impossible for the Americans to occupy. Colonel Werner Schröder of the German 107th Panzer Division later wrote in his captured journal, "It was as if we were fighting ghosts. Their forces seemed to materialize from nowhere, striking precisely where we least expected. Our intelligence had completely failed us." The German command, believing they had encountered a much larger force than anticipated, committed more troops to what they perceived as an unexpected American strongpoint. This was the second phase of White Cloud's plan, drawing the enemy deeper into the trap. By mid-morning, the German forces had unwittingly followed exactly the path White Cloud had predicted. Their tanks and infantry were now caught in a carefully designed pocket, with their own forces blocking their retreat due to the narrow forest roads. "Like herding buffalo off a cliff," White Cloud reportedly said, as he observed the German forces' movements from a forward position. What happened next was described by war correspondent William Bradford, who was embedded with the 101st. "I've witnessed many battles in this war, but never have I seen such a masterful execution of tactical deception. The German forces, vastly superior in numbers and equipment, found themselves utterly confounded. Their tanks were immobilized in the tight confines of the forest paths, unable to maneuver or bring their superior firepower to bear. Their infantry, expecting to overrun a weakened enemy, instead walked into precision fire from multiple unexpected angles. By noon, the German commanders realized they had been outmaneuvered, but it was too late. Their forces were fragmented, communications disrupted, and their carefully planned assault had devolved into chaos. What should have been a straightforward operation to eliminate a surrounded enemy had turned into a nightmare of confusion and mounting casualties. A German radio operator captured later that day reported that their command was in disarray. "We could not understand what was happening. Our intelligence said the Americans had no more than 600 men, yet we seemed to be fighting thousands. They appeared to be everywhere and nowhere at once." As the afternoon wore on, the tide had completely turned. The German units, now disorganized and cut off from each other, began to surrender in groups. By 1700 hours, over 800 German soldiers had been captured. Their remaining forces were in full retreat, abandoning valuable equipment in their haste to escape the trap. The final count was staggering. In less than 10 hours of combat, the Americans had neutralized approximately 3,000 German troops, killing or wounding nearly 900 and capturing over 1,100, with the remainder in disorganized retreat. They had destroyed or captured 27 tanks and dozens of other vehicles. And most remarkably, American casualties numbered only 38 men. Major Hammond, who had taken the enormous risk of approving White Cloud's unorthodox plan, was stunned by the outcome. "I've been in this man's army for 20 years, he reportedly told his staff that evening, "and I've never seen anything like what happened today." In the command tent that night, officers who had laughed at White Cloud's strategy now listened intently as he explained the principles behind it. "My ancestors fought against overwhelming odds for generations," he told them. "When you cannot match your enemy's strength, you must become something they don't understand. You must make them defeat themselves." Word of the incredible victory quickly spread through the Allied forces. General Maxwell Taylor, commander of the 101st Airborne Division, arrived the following day to personally assess the situation. After a thorough briefing on what had transpired, he reportedly sat in silence for a full minute before speaking. "In all my years of military service and study, I've never encountered such an innovative application of tactical principles," Taylor finally said. "Private White Cloud, you have achieved something remarkable here." The success of Operation Ghost Arrow created a significant breach in the German defensive line, allowing Allied forces to advance over 20 miles in the following week, progress that would have normally taken a month of hard fighting. Military historians would later analyze the battle as a perfect example of asymmetric warfare, where a smaller force defeats a larger one through superior strategy rather than firepower. But many of the specific techniques employed by White Cloud that day were never formally documented in military textbooks. They remained, as they had been for centuries, part of the oral tradition of Cherokee tactical knowledge. Dr. Robert Blackhawk, professor of military history at West Point and himself of Lakota descent, would later write, "What Private White Cloud accomplished that October day represents a fascinating intersection of indigenous knowledge and modern warfare. His ability to adapt ancient hunting and warrior tactics to the mechanized battlefield of World War II demonstrates the enduring relevance of Native American strategic thinking." But the story of Thomas White Cloud and his extraordinary achievement remained largely untold in mainstream historical accounts of the war. Like so many contributions of Native Americans to American military success, it was overshadowed by more conventional narratives. White Cloud himself never sought recognition for his achievement. When asked about it years later, he reportedly said, "I simply remembered what my grandfather taught me. The wisdom of our people has always been there. Sometimes it just takes the right moment for others to see its value." The official military report of the engagement, filed by Major Hammond, recommended White Cloud for the Silver Star for exceptional tactical innovation and gallantry in action. The recommendation was approved, and White Cloud received the decoration in a small ceremony 3 weeks later. But the full extent of his contribution was classified as sensitive tactical information. It wasn't until 1978, when previously classified documents from the war were released under the Freedom of Information Act, that researchers began to piece together the remarkable story of how a Cherokee private's ridiculous strategy had led to one of the most efficient tactical victories of the European campaign. One of those documents was a letter from General Dwight D. Eisenhower to General Omar Bradley, dated November 5, 1944. In it, Eisenhower wrote, "The recent action of the 101st near Ardennes represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need more of. When conventional approaches fail, we must be willing to embrace unorthodox solutions. This Private White Cloud may have shown us something valuable." As surviving veterans of the 101st, began sharing their stories in the 1980s and 90s, more details emerged about that extraordinary day and the quiet Cherokee engineer who had temporarily taken on the role of tactical genius. "We thought he was crazy," recalled Sergeant Michael D'Angelo in a 1987 interview with the Veterans History Project. "When they told us the plan, half of us figured we'd be dead by lunchtime. But I'll tell you what, I've never seen anything work so perfectly in combat. It was like the Germans were fighting blind while we could see everything." But the deeper significance of White Cloud's achievement extended beyond that single battle. It represented a powerful example of how indigenous knowledge, often dismissed or forgotten by mainstream American society, could prove invaluable in the most unexpected contexts. The integration of Native American tactical thinking with modern warfare wasn't entirely unprecedented. The famous code talkers of the Navajo, Cherokee, and other tribes had already demonstrated the military value of indigenous knowledge and language. But White Cloud's contribution represented something different: the application of an entire strategic philosophy derived from centuries of Native American warfare experience. Lieutenant James Blackwater, one of the officers present at the original planning meeting, later reflected, "What I remember most was how calm White Cloud was. While we were all panicking, he had this serene confidence. He kept saying, 'This is how my people have survived against greater forces for hundreds of years.' At first, I thought it was just bravado. I couldn't have been more wrong." As Private White Cloud outlined his strategy to the skeptical officers, he explained concepts that had no direct equivalence in conventional military doctrine. He spoke of becoming like smoke to the enemy, of turning the deer hunter into the deer, and of making the enemy's eyes see what isn't there. These concepts, poetic as they sounded, translated into precise military maneuvers. The smoke became an elaborate deception plan that presented false targets and concealed real ones. Turning the hunter meant reversing the psychological dynamics of the engagement, making the Germans believe they were springing a trap when in fact they were walking into one. And making the enemy's eyes lie involved a sophisticated series of feints and diversions that completely confused German reconnaissance. What made White Cloud's approach particularly effective was how alien it was to German military thinking. The Prussian tradition that formed the backbone of German tactical doctrine emphasized direct confrontation, clear objectives, and efficient use of superior force. It had no framework for understanding an opponent who deliberately created chaos and ambiguity as strategic weapons. The Germans were excellent at executing complex, precise operations, explained Dr. Eleanor Winters of the U.S. Army War College. But that very precision made them vulnerable to White Cloud's approach. They couldn't adapt when their carefully constructed understanding of the battlefield turned out to be completely wrong. As night fell on October 13, 1944, the men of the 101st Airborne gathered around campfires, trying to make sense of what they had just experienced. Many approached White Cloud, curious about the thinking behind the strategy that had saved their lives. Corporal David Schwartz later recalled, "He didn't brag or act superior. He just started telling us stories. Old Cherokee tales about how their warriors had defeated larger enemies, about hunting techniques and battle tactics passed down through generations. We sat there listening until dawn, completely fascinated. It was like discovering an entirely different way of thinking about warfare." For the next 3 days, as the division regrouped and integrated the newly captured German equipment into their arsenal, White Cloud became an unofficial instructor. Officers and enlisted men alike sought him out, asking questions about his tactical approach. General Taylor himself reportedly spent several hours in private conversation with the Cherokee private. But as reinforcements arrived and the division prepared to continue its advance, the unique circumstances that had allowed White Cloud's unorthodox approach to flourish began to fade. The conventional military hierarchy reasserted itself. White Cloud returned to his regular duties, his brief moment as the division's tactical savior coming to an end. On October 18th, as the 101st prepared to move out, Major Hammond found White Cloud performing maintenance on a jeep. "I still don't fully understand what you did out there," Hammond reportedly told him, "but I want you to know that a lot of men are alive today because of you." White Cloud simply nodded. "My grandfather would say that wisdom doesn't belong to any one person. It was there when it was needed." The division continued its advance through France, eventually participating in the Battle of the Bulge and the final push into Germany. White Cloud served with distinction throughout, though he was never again called upon to design a major tactical operation. After the war, Thomas White Cloud returned to Oklahoma and completed his engineering degree. He worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs for several years before starting his own construction company. He rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, even to family members. His son, John White Cloud, would later recall, "Dad never bragged about what he did in the war. I only found out about it when one of his old Army buddies visited us in 1967 and couldn't believe Dad hadn't told us the story. He said, 'Your father saved an entire division with his Cherokee magic.' Dad just laughed and said it wasn't magic, just common sense." Thomas White Cloud passed away in 1983, taking many of the details of his extraordinary tactical innovation with him. But the impact of what he accomplished lived on, both in the lives of the men he saved and in the gradual recognition of the value of indigenous knowledge in military thinking. In 2004, the United States Army War College added a case study of Operation Ghost Arrow to its curriculum on asymmetric warfare. The accompanying text notes, "While conventional military doctrine remains the foundation of modern tactical thinking, the White Cloud incident demonstrates the potential value of incorporating indigenous knowledge systems and non-Western strategic concepts into our tactical repertoire." For the Cherokee Nation, White Cloud's achievement became a source of quiet pride. At the Cherokee Veterans Memorial in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, a small plaque commemorates his Silver Star and briefly describes his contribution. It reads, in part, "Through the application of traditional Cherokee tactical wisdom to modern warfare, Private White Cloud demonstrated the enduring value of our people's knowledge." But perhaps the most telling tribute came from Werner Schroeder, the German colonel who had commanded the opposing forces that day. In a 1967 interview for a West German military journal, Schroeder, by then a NATO advisor, was asked about his most challenging experience during the war. "It was near the Ardennes, in October of '44, he said without hesitation. "We encountered an American force that fought like no Europeans I had ever faced. Later, I learned that their strategy had been designed by a Native American soldier. It made sense then. We were not prepared for such thinking. In all my military training, nothing had equipped me to counter it. It was as if we were playing chess, and suddenly our opponent was playing an entirely different game, by different rules." Schroeder paused before adding, "If the Americans had employed such tactics more widely, the war might have ended much sooner." As the decades passed, the story of Private Thomas White Cloud and his extraordinary tactical innovation might have faded entirely from public memory if not for a series of coincidental discoveries that began in the early 2000s. Dr. Maria Talchief, a military historian researching Native American contributions to World War II, stumbled upon references to Operation Ghost Arrow while examining declassified operational reports from the European theater. Intrigued by the unusual name and the cryptic descriptions of unconventional tactical applications, she began piecing together the remarkable events of October 13th, 1944. "What I found was astonishing," Dr. Talchief wrote in her 2007 book, Indigenous Wisdom in Modern Warfare. Here was clear documentation of one of the most efficient tactical victories of the European campaign, achieved through the application of traditional Cherokee strategic principles, yet it had been virtually erased from official military history. Her research led her to David Littlehawk, Thomas Whitecloud's nephew, who had preserved his uncle's wartime journals and letters. These personal documents provided unprecedented insight into the thinking behind Operation Ghost Arrow. In one journal entry dated October 10, 1944, just 3 days before the battle, Whitecloud had written, "Our situation grows desperate. The Germans have us surrounded, and conventional tactics offer no solution. Last night, I dreamed of my grandfather. He reminded me of the old stories, of how our warriors would defeat larger forces of cavalry. The principles are the same, even if the weapons have changed. I've been hesitant to speak up. Who would listen to a private? But tomorrow I will find the courage. Our lives may depend on it." Another entry, written the night after the battle, revealed Whitecloud's thoughts on the victory. They called it genius, but it was simply the wisdom of our ancestors applied to a new problem. The commanders here think in straight lines, in solid formations and direct confrontations. My grandfather would laugh at such rigidity. In nature, nothing survives by being rigid. Water flows around obstacles. Wind finds the smallest openings. This is how our people have survived for centuries against greater forces. These journals, combined with interviews of surviving veterans and declassified military reports, allowed Dr. Talchief to reconstruct the battle in unprecedented detail. Her findings revealed something even more remarkable than the initial accounts had suggested. What Whitecloud created wasn't just a clever trick or a momentary tactical advantage, she wrote. It was a comprehensive alternative approach to warfare, one that integrated Cherokee concepts of harmony with nature, spiritual awareness, and psychological understanding with modern military operations. The full tactical brief that Whitecloud presented to Major Hammond that fateful night included concepts that had no equivalents in Western military doctrine. He spoke of listening to the forest to determine enemy movements, of understanding the spirit of the enemy commander to predict his decisions, and of creating a battlefield where the truth and the illusion become indistinguishable. See, these poetic-sounding concepts translated into highly practical military innovations. Listening to the forest became an elaborate system of forward observers and sound monitoring posts that tracked German movements with uncanny accuracy. Understanding the enemy commander's spirit was essentially a deep psychological analysis of German tactical doctrine and the likely responses of officers trained in that tradition. And the merging of truth and illusion referred to a sophisticated deception plan that made it impossible for German reconnaissance to distinguish between real and fake American positions. What made these innovations particularly effective was their integration into a holistic system that operated on multiple levels simultaneously: physical, psychological, and even spiritual. German commanders, trained in the highly rational Prussian military tradition, found themselves unable to comprehend, let alone counter, an approach that deliberately created ambiguity and operated outside their conceptual framework. In essence, wrote military analyst Colonel James Thunderhawk in a 2009 assessment, what Whitecloud achieved was the military equivalent of speaking a language the enemy couldn't understand. The Germans were looking for patterns they recognized, seeking the familiar shapes of military formations, the expected deployment of forces, the conventional relationships between frontline units and reserves. Whitecloud gave them none of these recognizable patterns. Instead, he created a battlefield environment that made perfect sense to him, but appeared as chaos to the enemy. The rediscovery of Whitecloud's achievement coincided with a broader reassessment of indigenous knowledge systems in the early 21st century. Military strategists, facing unconventional adversaries in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, began looking beyond conventional Western military doctrine for new approaches. In 2011, the United States Special Operations Command established a classified program codenamed Ancient Wisdom that studied traditional warfare methods from various indigenous cultures. While the specific content of this program remains classified, former participants have confirmed that White Cloud's application of Cherokee tactical principles was a foundational case study. What made White Cloud's approach so valuable to modern special operations, explained retired Major William Red Cloud, who served as a cultural advisor to the program, was its emphasis on psychological dominance rather than physical destruction. In today's complex conflicts, where winning hearts and minds is often more important than destroying enemy forces, this approach has special relevance. But as interest in White Cloud's tactical innovations grew within military circles, disturbing questions began to emerge about why his achievement had been so thoroughly minimized in official histories of World War II. Dr. Eleanor Winters of the Army War College conducted an exhaustive review of military records from 1944 to 1946 and found a troubling pattern. Following the initial reports of the battle, which clearly attributed the tactical design to Private White Cloud, subsequent references gradually diminished his role. She noted in a 2012 paper. By 1946, official accounts described the engagement as a successful application of deception tactics by 101st Airborne Command, with no mention of White Cloud at all. This erasure wasn't limited to White Cloud. Dr. Winters found similar patterns in how the contributions of other Native American soldiers, as well as Black and Hispanic service members, were systematically minimized or erased in official military histories. There appears to have been a conscious or unconscious effort to maintain a narrative of World War II that emphasized conventional military doctrine and traditional command structures, she concluded, acknowledging that a Cherokee private had developed a tactical innovation that seasoned officers couldn't conceive of, simply didn't fit that preferred narrative. As White Cloud's story gradually re-emerged from historical obscurity, it found resonance not just with military historians, but with the broader Cherokee nation. In 2015, the Cherokee National Historical Society established the Thomas White Cloud Tactical Heritage Program, designed to preserve and teach traditional Cherokee strategic concepts. What our ancestor accomplished wasn't just a victory for American forces in World War II, explained Rebecca White Cloud, Thomas's granddaughter and one of the program's founders. It was a validation of knowledge that our people have carried for centuries, knowledge that was systematically dismissed and devalued by Western institutions. The program began documenting the oral traditions of tactical wisdom still preserved among Cherokee elders. These included hunting techniques, battle strategies, methods of concealment and deception, psychological warfare tactics, and systems for reading and utilizing terrain that had been passed down through generations. Much of this knowledge was in danger of being lost, Rebecca noted. The elders who carried these traditions were passing away, and younger generations, influenced by mainstream American culture, often didn't recognize their value. Thomas White Cloud's story showed that this ancestral wisdom wasn't just of historical interest. It had practical applications even in the modern world. But as this revival of interest in Cherokee tactical traditions gained momentum, an unexpected and disturbing development emerged. In 2017, investigative journalist Michael Blackfeather discovered that shortly after the war, the U.S. military had conducted a classified program to extract and document indigenous tactical knowledge from Native American veterans. Codenamed Operation Thunderbird, PT. This program identified Native American soldiers who had demonstrated unusual tactical abilities during combat. These individuals were extensively debriefed, their approaches documented and analyzed for potential military applications. The program's findings were compiled into a classified tactical manual that was distributed to select military intelligence units. What makes this program ethically problematic, Blackfeather wrote in his exposé published in The Atlantic, is that the Native American veterans were never told the true purpose of their debriefings. They believed they were simply giving standard after-action reports. They were never informed that their cultural knowledge was being systematically extracted and repurposed for military use, nor were their tribes ever acknowledged or compensated for this intellectual property. Documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed that Thomas Whitecloud had been one of the primary subjects of Operation Thunderbird. His debriefings had been particularly extensive, lasting over 2 weeks in December 1945. The tactical manual produced from these sessions, titled Asymmetric Response Protocols, remained classified until 2010. This revelation cast Whitecloud's story in a new and more complex light. His tactical innovation had not only saved American lives and contributed to the Allied victory, it had also led to the covert appropriation of Cherokee cultural knowledge by the same government that had, in previous generations, sought to eradicate Cherokee culture entirely. "There's a profound irony here," noted Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Charles Hoskin, Jr. in a 2018 statement. The same military that once enforced policies designed to eliminate our way of life later recognized the value of our tactical traditions, but did so in a way that continued to marginalize and exploit our people, rather than acknowledge and honor their contributions. The controversy surrounding Operation Thunderbird led to calls for formal recognition of and compensation for the unattributed use of indigenous knowledge in military applications. In 2019, a bipartisan congressional bill was introduced to establish a commission to investigate the program and make recommendations for appropriate acknowledgement and restitution. Meanwhile, the reassessment of Whitecloud's achievement continued within military circles. At the National Defense University, a 2020 symposium titled Indigenous Wisdom in Modern Warfare brought together military strategists, historians, and representatives from various Native American nations to explore the contemporary relevance of traditional tactical knowledge. What Whitecloud demonstrated wasn't just a clever trick that worked once in specific circumstances, said General Robert Grayhawk, the symposium's keynote speaker. He revealed an entire alternative framework for understanding conflict, one that emphasizes harmony with the environment, psychological insight, and indirect approaches over brute force. As we face increasingly complex and asymmetric threats in the 21st century, this framework may prove invaluable. The symposium established a working group to integrate indigenous tactical concepts into modern military doctrine, with proper attribution and respect for their cultural origins. This initiative represented a significant shift from the appropriative approach of Operation Thunderbird toward a more collaborative and respectful engagement with indigenous knowledge systems. But perhaps the most powerful testament to Whitecloud's legacy came from the families of the men who served in the 101st Airborne that fateful day in October 1944. James Morelli, whose father Anthony was a corporal in the division, shared a story at a 2021 commemoration event. "My father rarely talked about the war, but he spoke about that day many times. He always said the same thing. We should have all died there. 3,000 Germans against 600 of us. We had no chance. But then this Cherokee kid stepped up with the craziest plan I'd ever heard. The officers laughed at him. We all thought he was nuts. But when it worked, my God, when it worked, it was like watching a miracle unfold." Morelli paused, fighting back tears before continuing. "My father said he learned something that day that changed him forever. He realized that sometimes the people you dismiss, the people whose knowledge and traditions you think are primitive or irrelevant, those are exactly the people who might save your life. Dad said he never looked at a Native American the same way again, and neither have I." As historians continue to piece together the full story of Thomas Whitecloud and Operation Ghost Arrow, disturbing questions emerged about whether similar indigenous tactical innovations may have occurred in other battles, innovations that were subsequently attributed to commanding officers or simply absorbed into official accounts without acknowledgement of their origins. Dr. Maria Talchief's ongoing research has identified at least 7 other significant World War II engagements where Native American soldiers appear to have made crucial tactical contributions that were subsequently minimized or erased from official records. The pattern is consistent and troubling, she noted in a recent interview. Indigenous knowledge was utilized when advantageous, but rarely credited and certainly never valued on its own terms. This represents not just historical inaccuracy, but a continuation of the colonial appropriation of native wisdom and resources. The full extent of this historical erasure may never be known. Many of the Native American veterans who might have shared their stories have now passed away, their contributions unrecorded. Official military records, shaped by the biases of their time, often reduced Indigenous soldiers to stereotypical roles or omitted their distinctive contributions entirely. Yet the rediscovery of Thomas Whitecloud's remarkable achievement offers hope that other such stories may yet be uncovered and properly acknowledged. It stands as a powerful reminder that wisdom comes in many forms and from many traditions, and that dismissing knowledge simply because it originates outside dominant cultural paradigms can be not just unjust, but dangerously self-limiting. In recent years, the U.S. military has shown increasing openness to indigenous tactical wisdom. The Army Rangers now include training modules on Native American scouting techniques. The Marine Corps has incorporated traditional indigenous camouflage methods into its advanced reconnaissance training, and special operations units regularly consult with Native American advisors on unconventional warfare approaches. These developments represent a belated acknowledgement of what Thomas Whitecloud demonstrated nearly 80 years ago, that indigenous knowledge systems, far from being relics of the past, can offer sophisticated solutions to contemporary challenges. But for the Cherokee Nation, Whitecloud's legacy extends far beyond military applications. His story has become a powerful symbol of the enduring value of Cherokee wisdom in a modern world that often prioritizes technological solutions over traditional knowledge. "What my grandfather showed," said Rebecca Whitecloud at the opening of the Tactical Heritage Center in Tahlequah, "was that our ancestors weren't just survivors, they were innovators. Their understanding of strategy, psychology, and the natural world wasn't primitive. It was sophisticated in ways that Western military doctrine was only beginning to comprehend. That's a lesson that applies far beyond warfare, to everything from environmental management, to conflict resolution, to community building." Tutors, the center now hosts regular workshops where Cherokee elders share traditional tactical concepts with both tribal youth and visiting military personnel. These sessions emphasize that the principles that informed Operation Ghost Arrow were not just military techniques, but expressions of a holistic Cherokee worldview that saw harmony and balance as the foundations of effective action. In the Cherokee tradition, the best strategy is one that restores balance rather than creating greater imbalance, explained Elder William Bushyhead during a recent workshop. This is why our traditional warfare emphasized precision, deception, and psychological dominance rather than mass destruction. The goal was always to achieve the necessary objective while maintaining harmony with the natural world and minimizing harm to all involved. This philosophical dimension of Cherokee tactical thinking stands in stark contrast to the Western military tradition's historical emphasis on overwhelming force and decisive destruction of enemy capabilities. It offers an alternative framework that may prove increasingly relevant in an era when military operations often take place in complex civilian environments where minimizing collateral damage is essential. In 2022, the Pentagon formally acknowledged the contribution of Thomas Whitecloud and issued a posthumous commendation recognizing his exceptional tactical innovation that saved hundreds of American lives and significantly advanced the Allied cause. This belated recognition, while welcome, highlighted how long indigenous contributions to American military success have gone unacknowledged. The commendation ceremony, held at the Pentagon with Whitecloud's descendants in attendance, included the unveiling of a previously classified tactical assessment from 1945. The document, written by a military intelligence officer who had observed the aftermath of Operation Ghost Arrow, contained a prescient warning. The tactical approach demonstrated by Private White Cloud represents a fundamentally different paradigm of warfare than that taught in our military academies. Its effectiveness raises profound questions about the limitations of our conventional doctrine. If we dismiss this approach simply because it originates from a tradition we consider primitive, we may be blinding ourselves to valuable innovations that could prove decisive in future conflicts. This assessment, filed away and ignored for nearly 8 decades, stands as a testament to the institutional biases that prevented the military establishment from fully recognizing and learning from White Cloud's achievement. Today, as the United States military grapples with the challenges of 21st-century warfare, from counterinsurgency to cyber operations to the ethical implications of autonomous weapons, the story of Thomas White Cloud offers a powerful reminder of the value of diverse perspectives and the danger of dismissing unconventional wisdom. "What we're really talking about," said General Robert Greyhawk at the commendation ceremony, "is intellectual humility." The officers who laughed at Private White Cloud's ridiculous plan were not bad men. They were simply unable to see beyond the limitations of their training and experience. The lesson for today's military leaders is clear. The next crucial innovation, the next life-saving tactical breakthrough, may come from the person or tradition you're most inclined to dismiss. This lesson extends far beyond military applications. In fields from medicine to environmental management to conflict resolution, indigenous knowledge systems increasingly are being recognized for their sophisticated insights and practical wisdom. Yet the story of Thomas White Cloud also carries a warning. The systematic minimization of his achievement reflects a broader pattern of appropriating indigenous knowledge while dismissing its origins and cultural context. True respect for such knowledge requires not just acknowledging its practical value, but understanding and honoring the worldviews and traditions from which it emerges. As interest in White Cloud's tactical innovation has grown, some military analysts have attempted to reduce it to a set of techniques that can be extracted from their cultural context and incorporated into conventional doctrine. This approach, according to Rebecca White Cloud, misses the essential point. What my grandfather brought to that battlefield wasn't just a clever set of tricks, she explained. It was a way of seeing the world, of understanding the relationships between things that came from generations of Cherokee experience. You can't separate the tactics from the worldview that produced them and still expect them to work the same way. This perspective suggests that fully benefiting from indigenous knowledge systems may require more than simply extracting useful techniques. It may demand a deeper engagement with indigenous worldviews and a willingness to question fundamental assumptions of dominant cultural paradigms. Such engagement remains challenging in a world where indigenous perspectives continue to be marginalized and indigenous communities face ongoing struggles for recognition, resources, and rights. The belated acknowledgement of White Cloud's achievement, while important, does not erase the historical and continuing injustices faced by Native Americans. Yet his story offers a compelling vision of what might be possible when indigenous knowledge is truly valued and integrated into broader societal approaches. It suggests that solutions to some of our most pressing contemporary challenges may already exist within traditions that have been systematically dismissed as primitive or irrelevant. As Thomas White Cloud himself reportedly told Major Hammond after their improbable victory, "The wisdom was always there. It was just waiting for the moment when you were ready to hear it." That moment, for American society more broadly, may finally be arriving. As climate change, social division, and global instability create challenges that conventional approaches struggle to address, the wisdom of indigenous traditions, including the strategic insights that informed White Cloud's remarkable achievement, may prove increasingly relevant. The story of how one Cherokee soldier's ridiculous strategy defeated 3,000 German troops in a single day is more than just a fascinating historical anecdote or a tale of military innovation. It is a powerful reminder that wisdom comes in many forms and from many sources, and that our ability to address the challenges we face may depend on our willingness to listen to voices and traditions we have too often dismissed. In the forests near where that improbable battle took place, a small memorial now stands. Erected by veterans of the 101st Airborne Division, it bears a simple inscription. On this ground, in October 1944, ancient wisdom met modern warfare. Lives were saved. History was made. The wisdom of the Cherokee people lives on. Each year, on the anniversary of the battle, Cherokee representatives join with military personnel and local French citizens to commemorate the event. They perform traditional ceremonies, share stories, and remember not just what was achieved that day, but what it represents, the enduring value of indigenous knowledge and the power of seeing beyond conventional wisdom. As the world continues to grapple with complex challenges that defy conventional solutions, the legacy of Thomas Whitecloud offers both inspiration and instruction. It reminds us that sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected sources, and that what may initially seem ridiculous to established ways of thinking might ultimately prove transformative. Yet questions remain about the full extent of Whitecloud's innovation and its contemporary applications. Recently declassified documents suggest that not all aspects of his tactical approach were documented or preserved. Some elements, particularly those related to what might be termed the spiritual or intuitive dimensions of Cherokee tactical thinking, appear to have been deliberately omitted from official records as being too esoteric or culturally specific. These aspects, according to Cherokee elders familiar with traditional tactical teachings, may have been among the most powerful and distinctive elements of Whitecloud's approach. They speak to a way of understanding and relating to the battlefield environment that transcends conventional military analysis, an approach that integrates physical, psychological, and spiritual dimensions in ways that Western military doctrine has only begun to explore. As researchers continue to piece together the full story of Thomas Whitecloud and Operation Ghost Arrow, they face not just historical questions, but ethical and cultural ones. How can indigenous tactical wisdom be respectfully studied and potentially applied without repeating the appropriative patterns of the past? How can military institutions benefit from such wisdom while properly acknowledging and respecting its origins? And how might broader societal challenges benefit from similar cross-cultural learning? These questions have no easy answers, but as the improbable victory of October 13th, 1944 fades from living memory into historical record, the essential lesson it offers remains clear and compelling. Wisdom often emerges from unexpected sources, and our willingness to recognize and embrace such wisdom, even when it challenges our most fundamental assumptions, may determine our ability to overcome the challenges we face. As Thomas Whitecloud himself might have put it, sometimes the most powerful strategy is simply to listen to voices we've trained ourselves not to hear. The story of how one Cherokee soldier's ridiculous strategy saved hundreds of American lives and dealt a significant blow to German forces serves as a testament to the enduring value of indigenous knowledge and the danger of dismissing wisdom simply because it originates outside dominant paradigms. It reminds us that, in our most desperate moments, salvation may come not from doubling down on familiar approaches, but from embracing entirely new perspectives that may have been there all along, waiting for us to recognize their value. As we face the complex challenges of the 21st century, from climate change to global conflict to technological disruption, the legacy of Thomas Whitecloud offers a profound invitation to approach these challenges with intellectual humility, cultural openness, and a willingness to see wisdom where we least expect it. Only then might we discover as the officers of the 101st Airborne did on that fateful day in 1944, that what initially seems ridiculous might ultimately prove to be exactly what we need. As we conclude this remarkable story, remember that the wisdom of our ancestors, of all our ancestors, from every cultural tradition, remains a precious resource in our troubled times. Like the officers who initially scoffed at White Cloud's plan, we too might be blind to solutions that exist right before us, simply because they emerge from traditions or perspectives we've been taught to dismiss. May we find the humility to listen, the courage to embrace unfamiliar wisdom, and the faith to follow Christ's teaching that truth can come from the most unexpected sources. For as Jesus reminded us, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Let us pray that we might recognize the cornerstones our society has rejected and build upon them a more just, harmonious, and sustainable world. Amen.